The R129 is a state-of-the-art roadster that has received critical acclaim from both the public and the automotive press. Skilled craftsmen working in teams employ special assembly techniques to help ensure the highest quality for this limited production vehicle. Once the automobile leaves the factory, the personnel at Mercedes-Benz dealerships have the primary responsibility for maintaining the safety and performance of the SL. This program will cover some of the disassembly procedures you'll need to know in order to get access to various components in the R129. We'll start with the rear compartment and then look at the new seat and seat belt, the center console, the dashboard, and the door. In order to get access to the hydraulic lines for the top and roll bar hydraulic units, you'll need to remove the rear panels. We'll start by lifting the storage compartment cover in order to remove the bolts that hold the lower panel. You'll find 4 of these bolts under the driver's and passenger side hinged covers. Next, you'll have to remove the vacuum line that operates the locking mechanism for the compartments. Be careful to pull straight down. Otherwise, you'll run the risk of breaking the plastic retainer. Now you'll be able to pull the rear panel forward and lift it out so that the rear retaining tabs clear. The left and right vertical panels come out by removing the capped screw. And then the connector for the heated rear window. Be sure to press down on the sliding retainer clip before trying to remove the connector. Next, lift the flap and remove the Phillips screw. Using an offset Phillips, you'll only need to loosen the 2 outside screws to lift the plate out. As you'll see in just a second, this is because the plate is slotted for these screws. With your assembly wedge, loosen the trim and pull it away. Now you can pull straight out to unfasten the push-pin retainers, 1 located on the side and 2 on the lower edge. Lift up at the bottom and then pull out. The passenger side panel is removed in the same way. Under this plastic cover, you'll find the electrical control unit for the hydraulic top. Lifting the carpet out will expose the control unit for the roll bar. The seat cushions are held in with 2 Phillips screws. You can locate them by following the seat seam. Lift the cushion slightly before pulling it out. On cars equipped with heated seats, remember that you'll have an electrical connector to unplug. These Torx fasteners are unscrewed in order to remove the back cushion. Pull the cushion down to release the retaining pins. The back panel is also held in place with Torx screws. After removing the 4 Torx fasteners, the side panel can be taken out by sliding it out of its retainers. You can remove the seatbelt cover after taking out the 3 Torx screws. The lower trim panel uses both Torx and Phillips screws. You now have access to the seat belt anchor bolt. After removing the Torx bolts from the rear of the seat, observe the routing of the locking cable and remove the ETR. Before you remove the ETR connector, always be sure to disconnect the negative battery cable and SRS connector first. If the ETR has deployed, or if the unit shows signs of damage, it must be replaced. If you have to replace the Bowden cable for any reason, first loosen the bolt for the seatbelt buckle in order to release the cable. To help you later, pay careful attention to how the cable is routed through the seat before removing it. The seat itself is removed by unscrewing the side rail fasteners. Because of the weight of the seat, you should have another person help you lift it out of the car in order to prevent injury or damage. If you need to remove the center console, the first thing you'll want to do is remove the radio. Insert the special tools. The small tab on the top of the tool faces up. As soon as enough of the radio clears the console, remove it by hand and disconnect it from the harness. Next, reach in from behind and slide the climate control push-button assembly out. Here you can see how the special connectors are released. You can now remove the compartment backing so you'll have access to the 2 retaining screws. Next, remove the bolts through the opening for the climate control panel. Pull up at the rear of the wood trim to loosen the plate for the shift console. Lift the wood at the rear while releasing the top of the trim from the dash. Unplug the connectors for the window switches and, being careful to avoid scratches, remove the wood trim. To remove the console itself, remove the 2 screws located at the rear of the shift console. Opening the compartment cover, use an offset Phillips to remove the 4 screws. and then disconnect the vacuum and electrical connectors. With the cover out of the way, you can remove the lower screws inside the compartment. The compartment with the sliding cover can be lifted out separately by removing 4 screws. The next thing you'll want to do is remove the switches and their connectors. Then, lift the console straight up from the rear and pull it back. We'll start the dashboard removal process with the center vents. Use a hook to lift out the corner of the vent and remove it with a plastic wedge. Next, take out the 2 Phillips screws on either end and open the top compartment cover. After the 2 Phillips screws have been taken out, you can remove the entire compartment. By the way, the depth these screws are turned in will control the adjustment of the compartment door. Now you can remove the center vent. In order to remove the lock for the interior central locking, turn the key and insert a pin into the access hole. Twist the tumbler and pull it out. You can now remove the rest of the assembly and the electrical connector after taking out the Phillips screw. After disconnecting the negative battery terminal and the SRS connector, you can remove the retaining bolt for the passenger's airbag. To remove the instrument cluster, insert the special tool into the grooves on the side of the cluster and pull out slowly. If you have trouble removing the cluster with the tools, drop the under dash panel, reach under, and push the cluster from the rear. Doing this when you encounter a tightly fit cluster will prevent breakage. In order to get access to the dashboard bolts located under the speaker covers, remove the trim using a wedge and then a stubby Phillips driver. The knob for the rotary light switch is pulled straight back by using a pair of pliers. Be sure to use a shop rag to prevent damaging the knob. Next, remove the retaining nut and unhook the parking brake release. Now you can remove the 2 bolts and Phillips screw located in the instrument cluster area. In order for the dash to clear the steering column, you'll have to loosen both the cruise control and combi switches. Incidentally, make sure the directional switch is in the center position, that is, not signaling either a left or right turn, or you'll break the plastic sleeve when you go to reinstall the switch. Next, you can unscrew the retaining ring for the ignition switch. Remove the bolts on the passenger side next. Now you're ready to remove the dashboard. Be especially careful to avoid damage at the steering column. To remove the ignition switch assembly, turn the key to position 1 and disconnect the shift lock cable. Insert a tool into the assembly in order to release the locking tabs and remove the lock assembly. Remove the positive lock connector by pulling it towards yourself. To save yourself some trouble, it's a good idea to insert the tool into the switch to prevent it from turning with the lock removed. Now you can loosen the nut that holds the retaining pin in place. Use a drift to push the pin upward and out. With the pin removed, you can take the switch off the steering column. This is a good time to pause and take a close look at the transmission shift lock mechanism. There are 2 locking pawls operating on the shift lever cam. One is connected to the ignition switch. We'll simulate its movement by depressing the pin manually. Here you can see it lift the locking pawl. The other pawl is controlled via the brake cable, as you can see here. The shift lever can be moved only when both the brake and ignition pawls are released. Now, let's take a look at the procedures for removing the door panels. Most of the screws you'll need to remove are in plain view. you'll find that the panel itself is held in place with push pins, so you'll need to pop them straight out with a plastic wedge. When the last pin is out, lift the panel and disconnect the vacuum line for the door pocket flap. The cover for the outside rear view mirror can be disassembled for painting or replacement. After inserting the holding block, use a plastic wedge to separate the halves. In order to remove the door lock, pull the weather strip back and insert an Allen wrench with the key inserted into the lock. By the way, the connectors for the infrared locking system will come off as soon as the lock is lifted out. Be sure they are secured when you replace the handle. Slide the assembly to the rear and lift it out. You can check and adjust the closing and fit of the door by inserting this spacer into the striker. Close the door until the spacer contacts the locking plate, and check for fit with the plastic gauge block. If you need to make an adjustment, use an Allen wrench to move the locking plate either in or out until the gauge fits properly. The lower exterior panels are fastened with push pins and Phillips screws. You can adjust the door glass for the best fit with both front to rear and in and out adjustments. You'll do this by turning the adjustment bolts located under these rubber covers. Some of you may already have done a similar adjustment on the W124 coupe. You can check the door gap and the fit of the glass with a gauge block. When checking the glass adjustment, you'll want the gauge to be flush with the anodized molding. We've appreciated the time many of you have taken to write us concerning these Education for Excellence programs. Your comments and suggestions will continue to have a major influence on future programs. These programs can be ordered by filling out the post-paid card.